Welcome to Cactus Crossfire, your go-to for hot takes and prickly debates.
Welcome in, everybody. It's a great day to be on Cactus Crossfire. I'm one of your hosts, Sisto Abeyta. Always with me is my co-host, Eddie. Eddie Ableser, where you at?
Hey, Sisto. I am out here in Utah. We're enjoying the wonderful weather of Utah on the Wasatch Mountain front, and I'm thrilled that I'm joining you in the home of Gabriel Baca, 8688 Studios. You know, listen, I'm not going to tell, but I have seen Gabriel Baca. He has strangled a man with a cordless phone. It's incredible.
You know, it's amazing what Gabe can do from the technology side of the game. But Eddie, it's been a great week for us here at Cactus Crossfire. It's our favorite time of year. Election night passed us. We're talking about the June primaries today, and we're going to mine down into some of these states of where these primaries happen, New Mexico being one of them. Also talking about how the fact of the matter is that what we saw on election night was some shifts in ideology, some shifts in the way people were thinking. And, you know, some of the people that moved away from just having sound bites or actually trying to reshape the identities of both Democrats and Republicans in our state. But the bigger issue became from a lot of people that I'm hearing from in New Mexico and throughout the entire country, is there room for there to be balance again in American politics? And there's a lot of people concerned that, you know, we're having discussions that are in abstracts, and that the farmer who's managing drought-stricken crops and the parent navigating school board politics, the small business person overwhelmed by rising costs. These are all people that are out there that are wondering what's the future going to hold for all of us in the state of American politics. But we might have a few insights to that. So let's kick it off, Eddie. We're headed straight into this, and we wanted to talk about what happened in New Jersey. So give us a rundown.
Yeah. I mean, to this point, Sisto, we have seen this. We have seen this over decades. And you and I aren't that old, but we have seen it over decades. There is this pendulum that happens amongst the parties. There is a polling on the rubber band, which takes the other side of the rubber band and pulls it towards the middle. You saw it early on. You remember the whole Sarah Palin Tea Party Republicans, and that brought the Democrats to the middle. And then all of a sudden, the Democrats started leaking off left, and they became this progressive movement. First time ever in the history of the Democrat Party, you had these progressive ideologies introduced into the platform. And then the Republicans started coming to the middle, and they balanced that middle. Then the balance shifted when MAGA came out. And now what are we seeing, Sisto? We're seeing a dynamic where the change from MAGA is forcing Republicans into the middle and moving Democrats to the DSA moniker, the Democratic Socialists of America. This very radical communist portion of the party seems to be taking over many of these primaries. And that's what we're going to talk about today. And one person in particular is this Adam Hamawe from the 12th Congressional District in New Jersey. It's something I've been watching because he's one of these candidates that comes from this pro-Islamic fundamentalist pact that has been established in this country. And this pro-Islamic fundamentalism, they are backing a couple of candidates. They got the wins in North Carolina with Nida Alam. They got the wins in Pennsylvania with that guy that's going to be the Democratic nominee, Rab. So here's their third win. And it's this doctor that was in the army and is extremely pro-fundamentalist Islam. Adam Hamawe, he squeaked through, but his platform, Sisto, his platform is abolish ICE, right? So let's just not just say ICE, but abolish immigrations and customs enforcement. Get rid of all, let me say it the other way, forgive, but get rid of all medical and student debt. That means you're clearing all medical debt in the entire country. Incredible. Medicare for all, which seems to be a common theme point. And then, of course, his very pro-Islamic fundamentalism, anti-Israel, anti-Semitic stances, which tends to resonate. It's incredible that this guy won. It's even more telling is if you look deeper into this guy's history, he traveled, he associated, he met with Omar Abdel Raham. That is the convicted terrorist that was the mastermind from the 1993 bombing of the World Trade Center. And he'd be a congressman just over the river representing New Jersey from Princeton. So, it's crazy.
So Eddie, you've been on these guys for a while now. You've been talking about him. You've been talking about our friend up in New Jersey that we're going to be talking about a little bit later. But I want our folks to understand something is that, Eddie, you're saying that he traveled with this guy. That's not the case. It never was the case. Okay. The imam spoke at the same center that he attended. He attended it when he was younger. And that's the extent of it. Okay. There's been this sensationalism around him in that regard. At the other end, to bring you back in, is, this guy has, there's been discussions about him being anti-Semitic and all those things, but he's actually been out there and he made statements. He condemned anti-Semitism, but its rhetoric on U.S.-Israel relations particularly becomes terms like apartheid and such are triggering for folks. And I understand that. But he has made every effort to say, look, whether you're a Jewish, whether you are Islamic, on both ends of the spectrum, anti-Semitic rhetoric and also Islamophobic rhetoric are not going to work with him. So we've got to be very careful about where we're getting some of this information from and how we're talking about it. And why does it matter? And why does that matter? It's because Hamawi's win is a part of a national trend where we're seeing highly mobilized Democratic progressives dominating primaries in safe Democratic districts, right? And at the same time, there's changes to the coalition that existed within all of that. His victory sharpens the question of whether party leaders can balance transformative ideas with rhetoric that builds trust and an inclusion. And the broader impacts of all of this is what does it mean for the midterm elections, especially in areas where independents and centrists still decide what the final outcomes are going to be?
You make some good points. I mean, in the midterms, I want to get to that point real quick. I want to come back to you. But I think that the effects of the DSA on midterm elections are going to create what everyone believed was going to be the blue wave. It's going to be a blue swell. It's going to be a tiny little bubble. It'll carry a couple people through, but it forces those independent middle voters to say, you know what, I just can't stomach the extremism that we're seeing out of the Democratic Party. It once was the extremism from the Republican Party, and now they're responding. Of course, we'll see this, but I'm interested on your thoughts on that midterm effect as well.
And at the end of the day, that's what we're starting to see in this instance with Dr. Hamawi is that Dr. Hamawi became a focal point for a lot of folks because he was supported by a lot of these progressive PACs, including the one that you mentioned. But that's the new name of the game, Eddie, is that the progressive machine, the progressive power machine is much more focused and much more able to go into districts like the New Jersey 12 and put in a lot of resources to help uplift candidates and to really shape the narrative. The other part that's happened in this district is that he had such a broad message. He captivated younger voters, which we hadn't seen before. So that's a factor that we're going to be talking about in the weeks leading up to November. We're going to be talking about it a little bit today. But, that's just one of the instances where we're going to see a lot of these folks starting to have a more of a groundswell. Now, that's not to say that this is something new. I mean, progressive leaders have to come to this moment and with boldness and with care. They have to be considerate of what they're doing. But the question becomes, can he forge a path forward, like you're saying, that's transformative without alienating those he hopes to serve? And that's leadership at its hardest level.
Yeah, I would love for you to be right, Sisto. I'd love for many taking very bold stances and coming out in front and to speak with the other side. You and I know that very well. These individuals have to feed red meat to their base.
Yeah.
This guy has to perpetually give red meat to the base that got him through the primary and then hopefully in this general election. But my question is, when will those independents, when will the moderates stand up and on both sides, right? Both sides capitalize on the fact that we want someone who is rational, reasonable, and a centrist that works with both sides of the aisle. And if Hamawi can't do that, if he falls into the trap of AOC, Tlaib, all these Kana, all these crazy folks within the Democratic Party, he's going to be one of those individuals that should be condemned and criticized by people like you and me, because what they're doing is tearing down the party, because they're just feeding red meat back to the base that doesn't ever move the pendulum forward. They never create progress. They speak about it, but it is all about destruction of system. And so, listen, I will relent on some of the things around his association with Blind Sheik. Those relationships can be held secret. Sometimes they can't. This is not a conspiracy theory show. So I will relent on that and say maybe he never got into some of those poor relationships. He is part of that American Priorities Pact, which is the pro-Islamic fundamentalism pact that is funding certain candidates, and one of those is Maureen Galindo, the lady out of Texas that said she wanted to put Jews in concentration camps.
Well, and
incredible.
But the other part of that too is, Eddie, Jewish Americans have also had a pact for a number of years that progressives are starting to criticize as well. So this politics of pro-Palestine, pro-Israel within the Democratic Party isn't something that it manifested itself in this election. It's been around for a while. And that's where the leadership within the Democratic Party has to either figure out a way to bring these two people together to build a coalition that's going to help move things forward. Because especially in states like Pennsylvania and Michigan, where there's a large Muslim population, that's what made the difference for Trump in the 24 election. So if we're going to be Big Tent, we've got to be Big Tent, and we've got to figure a way for everybody to have a place at the table. But that also leads us into what happened in Iowa, right? Here we go.
In Iowa, very important race, Sisto.
Yeah,
very race.
While New Jersey reflects the rise of progressives, Iowa reveals a little bit of a contrasting story. One about stability, pragmatism, the Republican voters, to pull back from an ideological extreme. And so what's your take on the Iowa elections, Eddie?
Well, okay, so this goes back to that rubber band analogy that I was talking about, right? One side is moving so far to the extreme, the other side has to some sort of course correct and come to the middle. It's quite interesting to see this specific governor's primary in Iowa, right? You could look across the board. Some of the most extreme Republican candidates have lost their primary elections. However, it's very interesting. Trump isn't necessarily endorsing the most radical right individual. He's endorsing a variety of folks, which has been very interesting to see who he has backed. But most of them have won, except for this race. President Trump endorsed current Representative Fenstra, right? He decided to run for the Iowa gubernatorial race. And a gentleman, younger man, Zach Lawn came out. This is a business guy. This is a farmer from Iowa, deep roots. He is a centrist. He is a moderate. He came out and talked about Iowa first. We care about Iowa. I'm an Iowa guy, right? He came out and talked about what we need to do for rural healthcare and community investment, right? And he was very solutions focused. He was very poignant on this is how we do things in Iowa. And guess what? It's a close race, mind you. It was a squeaker, but he won. Yeah. And it tells me that the primary voters in the Republican Party are looking more for centrist ideas than what we see from the Democratic primaries across the country. But Trump did lose. This race.
And, and I think that this is about something bigger than politics. This is about farmers working the land, families rooted in their hometowns. I'm reminded in that concept of where I grew up and how campaigns and candidates communicated with my family, who, very often it wasn't beyond the scope that a candidate would show up at my parents' house, and my dad was out because this is springtime, right? He's out, baling alfalfa, getting the hay going for the season. And it wasn't about the getting caught up in the outrage of this person or that person. It was about, connecting with them and wanting to connect with my dad in a very meaningful way. Now, in that, sometimes my dad was out baling alfalfa. And I can remember very clearly candidates going out to the pasture, meeting with him on those terms, talking with him one-on-one. And sometimes, just sometimes, one candidate would help him haul in the hay. And I have a feeling that in this Iowa election, that's what you saw with somebody like Zach Lehan, is that he was able to connect with people on that level. And his victory says something that you've already alluded to, that it's that the loudest campaign rally is built in trust and showing up and doing the work. And I think that's exactly what we saw here. I think that the Trump brand is in trouble. I agree with you. This is not going to be a huge blue wave. It will be, but it's going to also shift the ideologies that we're talking about, whether you're extremely progressive or extremely conservative. There's might just be a chance through some of these races for people to start moving back towards the middle and those conversations to start happening. And I'm just am wondering within those conversations, is there enough on both sides of the aisle of folks that want to come back to the table and discuss issues, or does everybody want to stay in their respective corner and not have a conversation about developing a better America? That's the question I see moving forward.
And I think that is a nail on the head statement, Sisto, because now let's jump over to the West Coast, California gubernatorial primary. The two candidates in that race who are viewed as the most rational, the most centrist, the most common sense individuals looks like those two are going through in a jungle primary to the general election, right? Javier Becerra, who you and I have talked a lot about. I've watched his politics. I don't know him personally, but from what he has done, he has always been the guy that says, hey, let's make this table bigger and add more voices.
Yeah.
Let's add as many people around and more chairs so we can figure this out. And you come in with the Republican Steve Hilton, who also has the same temperament and a very calming style. He didn't embrace Trump. He didn't embrace MAGA. He embraced a common sense approach to the largest economy in this country and said, we have an opportunity to truly lead and make significant changes. Both of their voices were appealing, which is why they're both the highest vote getters. And I've been on record. I've gone in the past talking about Tom Steyer. Yes, I've met this guy. Yes, he came out to Arizona. He's tried to run for everything, right? He ran for president. This is a chief looking for a village. That's all he is. He wants people to follow him, but no one seems to want to do that. And he's throwing money left and right. And yes, I've joked he's one of the dorkiest candidates I've ever seen on the campaign trail. But I'm also happy he lost, because this guy, he got so desperate. He embraced those disgusting, vile podcasters, right? Hassan Piker and all those disgusting folks that just spew hatred. And he was associating himself with that to try to find a way with the DSAs to sneak into this election. And I'm thrilled he lost as well.
And I'm glad you bring up that point, because what was happening in the California primary in regards to social media influencers and people that were doing that. And I think that's what we're not trying to do here with Cactus Crossfire. We're not trying to be those guys that are become gunslingers for hire on the social media front. But the interesting part about the California primary is, like you said, it's a jungle primary. Democrats and Republicans are both on the ballot. Everybody shows up. Top two vote getters go to the runoff, which is the general election. And amazingly enough, you had a Democrat come out of that and a Republican, right?
Yeah. For a while, they thought it was going to be two Republicans.
Yeah.
Remember?
For a while, they thought it was
Bianco for a while.
Yeah. But at the same time, in that primary, the DSAs that you've been talking about, they were so loud that they got blown over by a quiet whisper that was coming from Javier Becerra.
Yeah, same thing in the LA. Think of the LA mayor's race, right? You had the DSA Nithya Raman, who came out and she's like, I'm the Memdani of the West Coast, right? She tried to bring this very extremist perspective. Karen Bass is still getting 35%, and don't look now, but the AI genius himself, Spencer Pratt, Mr. Crystals himself, Spencer Pratt, is in the runoff.
Yeah.
I mean, it's crazy to look at what's happening in that race. And again, Spencer Pratt, he's not embracing MAGA. He's not embracing Trump. He's just going about, and mind you, they both are a little kooky, in my opinion. Karen, I've known a little bit of her politics for many, many years, and Spencer, but it's going to be neat to see those two coming, especially because Nithya Raman, another DSA candidate that wanted to take that mantle, it got swept away from her. Same thing in Pelosi's old district, the 11th congressional, right? You had the guy that owned Stripe, right? That's millionaire. He worked for AOC. He worked for Bernie. Chakrabarti, that guy?
Yeah.
Chakrabarti. He got spanked in that election, right? He dropped millions of his own dollars, and State Senator Scott Weiner comes out of it, just a moderate, squeaky clean dude, comes out of that congressional race. California showed us something. And if California is the heartbeat of the country, I think we're in for some surprises in November. Well, because they showed us moderation. That's what they showed us.
And I think that's what we're trying to get to with this show, Eddie. I mean, with this episode is we're trying to get to for folks to understand there is so much of a apathy out there from voters feeling like this portion of the electorate has more control over the nominees than that portion of the electorate. And, when we're talking about these races, especially in California, the electorate is the entirety of the body. It's not just, you're not just housed it's a truly open primary, and it's what they call a jungle primary, because everybody's thrown in together. But everybody gets to pick who they want their top two to be. And, we kind of have something like that here in New Mexico in our municipal elections. We have runoffs. Sometimes we have instant runoffs, but I think that in this case, with the California model, you're right. California is showing us something. You don't have to be a completely blue state. You don't have to be a completely red state. You can show lighter shades of blue and lighter shades of red, and without becoming completely purple.
It's interesting. I was going to add one more thing. Do you remember Daryl Issa?
Yeah.
Very, very hardcore, like this hardcore immigration conservative from the San Diego congressional district. It's incredible. The people that might win that race are pretty, Democrat, first of all, potentials, but it looks like there might be, like, there's even ties, the Democrats might not want to associate with one of their candidates, Kampa Najjar. Like that guy is associated a little bit with the PLO and the 1972 Munich massacre, but it looks like it might go Democratic.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting to see what's going to happen with that race. Listen, I'm captivated by the temperament. Now, mind you, we all have to take this in doses. Sisto, because primary voters are the most educated within their party, activism within their party, and engaged.
Yeah.
And we know come general election, you have passive voters that show up, boring passive voters that don't really care. They usually just select a party. Yep. That's all they do, right? Yep. Or a name that resonates with them.
Yep.
So we have to take this in and be tempered in our understanding of how California behaved. But I think it's pretty compelling.
And, and that leads us to, and something that's near and dear to both of us, is my home state of New Mexico. New Mexico had its primary election. It is a semi-open primary, which means in New Mexico, folks can either, if you're an independent, you can walk into the polling location and you can pick a Democratic ballot or a Republican ballot. So what happened with these independents in New Mexico, they walked into the voting locations, 80% of them asked for a Democratic ballot, while the other 20% asked for a Republican ballot. So what was interesting to watch on election night is that 80% in the Democratic primary, which changed the trajectory of who won the election. We've had Sam Bregman and Deb Haaland both here on the show, two great Democratic candidates, but Deb Haaland gets almost 80% of the vote. I mean, she gets 70% of the vote overall. And she gets, early on in the evening, she gets 70 to Sam's 30. And at the same time, you had our lieutenant governor candidate, Maggie Toulouse-Oliver, a friend of ours in the Democratic primary. She got 80%, which created a strong ticket there. And then on the Republican side, you had a three-way primary. And you had Duke Rodriguez, who is a canna business owner here in New Mexico, owns one of the largest canna companies in the entire state. You had Doug Turner, who is a political operative and comms guy like you and me, is a small business owner here. And the mayor of Rio Rancho, New Mexico, Greg Hull, who was the first candidate in, wasn't very sexy of a candidate, just a good, he runs the third largest city in the state, the third largest economy in the state, and folks were writing this guy off. So Eddie, you know that I do election night coverage on KNNW. I had made the prediction weeks ahead of time of watching where early and absentee votes were coming out of. We were seeing that, the majority of the vote for the Republicans was coming out of Bernalillo County, San Juan County, and Sandoval County. Now, in Sandoval County, it's important for me to mention that that's where Rio Rancho's at. So if more than 52% of the entire vote is coming out of there, all Greg Hull had to do was win that county by 80% and not get his butt kicked in the other two, and he was on his way. Well, wow. Lo and behold, he outperforms in Bernalillo, he outperforms in San Juan, he outperforms in Rio Rancho to lead for, and this is not the Donald Trump candidate. And granted, he only got 47% of the Republican vote, but it shifted from the other two candidates, which got 53, but it shifted the ideology of the Republican Party in New Mexico. You now have a centrist running the Republican Party in New Mexico. He is the leader of the party right now. And a lot of folks are concerned about that in the Republican primary because they're like, we didn't want this guy. He was elected by the urban centers in the state. He's not going to be able to connect and connect with us on a level that we need him to be competitive against the woman who won 70% of the Democratic primary. And you're exactly right in that too, Eddie. In that primary, 30% of the Democrats turned out in this election. About 27% of the Republicans turned out, and about 10 or 11%, I think it might be a little bit lower than that, of the independents showed up in this election. So we had about a 24% overall voter turnout in the district, which in past times we've had closer to 30. But it tells you who's making the decisions for these candidates. As to go back to your point, it's the party insiders. So have the party insiders made the right choice in New Mexico in the Democratic Party? More than likely, the Democrats are going to line up behind him, and Greg Hull has a really tough time trying to get up to the number that he wants. But the interesting part is the MAGA wing of the party is not in control in New Mexico right now. So that, going back to what you said at the top of the hour, we might see that blip come from the in New Mexico a little bit. We may see it just create a different tone. And it may not win the governor's race, but it sure as heck is going to have a huge impact on the down tier races. Absolutely.
Absolutely. And see, so I'm really interested because from what I've learned about Greg Hull and I think we all know, we know the voter registration numbers in New Mexico. We know that, Secretary Holland is set up for the success to become the next governor in New Mexico. Now, things have changed. We've had Republicans governors in the past, and there has been this shifting movement. My thought is, I believe that Deb Haaland's team they're at a crossroads here with this candidate. Because if it were to be one of the MAGA candidates, then Deb and her team can take a more robust, democratic, more progressive stance within the state. Mm-hmm. I believe that with Greg as the leader of the Republican Party currently in New Mexico and running against her, she has to come to the middle and appeal to the middle voices and the business owners and the ranchers and the farmers and the hardworking blue-collar Americans within New Mexico to maintain a line of moderation within New Mexico.
Yeah.
I feel like, this is going to be a great general election season where we're going to find two candidates truly fighting over. I mean, how oftentimes do we get in this position where you see candidates fighting over the best way to solve a problem that they're almost identical in their ideas, but with a couple of nuanced changes? Like usually we're not even talking on the same universe half the time as candidates. They're so opposite and there's so much fighting. I'm pretty excited to see how these two campaigns roll out in New Mexico. And this gives me hope. I mean, we've got California. We've got two centrist, very reasonable thinkers in California. I would say centrist and leaning centrist candidates in New Mexico. It's pretty exciting. And now we have that in Iowa.
Yeah.
I mean, there's some really cool things happening across the country that I think the American public and our listeners and viewers get to be excited about, because the more we fight over the good ideas in the middle, the better this country is.
So we started this conversation talking about the eastern side of the state. We kind of moved into the heartland, went out to California, came back through New Mexico, and now we should head back up into the East Coast and talk about what was going on in Maine. So, Eddie, what do we got going on in Maine?
Oh boy, you're talking about P Hustle 0331, Mr. I'm taking oyster farming to a whole new level.
Yeah.
Listen, this is pretty pathetic. I mean, talk about mud on the face for the Democratic caucus, Senate caucus. They have picked this guy, Graham Planter, to be their a golden child in the state of Maine to take on Susan Collins. They think this is an opportunity to win a pickup, right? They have pulled this guy against her, and clearly the DC Democratic architects within the Senate have not done their research, because this guy came out with more dirty laundry than a homeless guy on Fifth Avenue. I mean, it is pretty disgusting. And so anyhow, this guy, this oyster farmer, this, P Hustle 0331. I mean, he comes out, and for 18 years, the guy has on his chest, right, a Totenkopf, right? One of these very Nazi symbols on his heart. Like, this is like a real life Derek Vineyard, right? That's the Edward Norton character from American History X that had that swastika on his chest. The same dude. Now he's running to be a Democratic Senate candidate. And guess what? Okay, he gets it covered up. Same did Derek Vineyard, right? And all this stuff there. But the Democrats, they dismiss it. Now information comes out that P Hustle 0331, right, otherwise known as Graham Planter, has been posting pictures of himself on this predatory sexual website where basically you get on there and try to hook up, and it is a very aggressive, I think it's called KIK or Keek or whatever. The point is, he is getting blasted in media over this. And to the point where Democratic senators are saying, this dude needs to resign. We've got the Democratic governor of Maine who can run in this primary. But nope. The Democratic Party, especially in the Senate, has an identity problem. So what did they do, Sisto? Mr. Schumer, Bernie Sanders, who's not even Democrats, aren't even know why he's going up there. But all these folks go and meet with Graham Planter, and he's like, oh, I'm okay. We can get through this, right? Trust me. I'm actually not doing anything that bad, just cheating on my wife a couple of times, maybe a couple dozen times, maybe, more than that. I don't know. And no, I used to be a Nazi, but I'm not a Nazi anymore. Like, let's just get over it, right? So they leave this meeting up in Maine, and what is Schumer and what is, Schiff and all these guys? Oh, no, we're standing behind Planter, right? They're standing. So they have this question, Sisto. Democrats, do we support victims of misogynistic violence towards women? Usually the hashtag Me Too movement has supported the victims, but clearly in this case, they're making an exception. Oh, do we oppose people who propagate hate and prejudice? Usually the Democratic Party has, not in this case. Why? Why are the Democrats so hypocritical in this one Senate race? Sisto, I know I'm being facetious in my question because everyone knows why the Democrats are being hypocritical. But I mean, where's the integrity, sir? Where's the integrity? Well, it frustrates me beyond belief.
Eddie, is that in this situation, the question is, it should have been, where there's smoke, right? That should have been the question from the onset with this guy. From the very beginning. And folks were enchanted by what was happening in Maine. I don't know if it's I don't know if it was the oysters. I don't know if it was the Maine lobster. I don't know, because I'm a desert guy. We don't get to have delicacies like that. We're steak and potatoes down here in New Mexico. But at the end of the day, you're 100% right. Leadership, but we're starting to see this break with the DSAs, right? the DSAs have done such a great job of going out and recruiting candidates and trying to get people on the ballot that sometimes they're not recruiting the best of folks. And this is just the first indication in that is starting to break the mold, is that the trusted sources that the Democratic Party has abdicated outside of the party structure that you and I grew up in. We didn't nominate people that we didn't see as ward chairs and precinct chairs and young Democrat officials to the positions. Most of the folks that we were talking about here in New Mexico, at some point, you and I knew as part of the Young Democrats and paid their dues to get to where they're at now. But at the same time, is that it just seems that they just were so upset with that old model of vetting candidates that they're just like, well, if you quack like a duck, you walk like a duck, you must be a duck, and not realizing that the duck has been diving under the water and is really not a duck. And so I think that the folks that the progressive institution and machine itself needs to take a stronger, and I'm not going to say this, and people, please be clear, this isn't the Democratic Party. This is the external dark money groups that you guys tell me you hate, but will never criticize on our side. But they're the ones that are making the decisions of who we nominate, and that's why we get somebody like Graham Planter in Maine, and for even the dean of that group, Bernie Sanders, to be fooled by this guy has to tell you that there's some chinks in the armor. And
did you hear what Bernie said after? So he did this meeting, because I'm interested in your take. Bernie walks out and says, well, of course, the richest people, right? Mind you, Bernie Sanders is a freaking millionaire. He makes way more money than all of us and anyone listening to the show. But, the richest people in this country want him to lose. And then he says, well, I guess he's not an angel. No one in here is an angel. I mean, he just,
it's like if you ever watched the movie, LBJ where Bryan Cranston was playing Lyndon Baines Johnson. There's a scene in that where he's in the limo with J. Edgar Hoover, and they're driving up to the White House, and J. Edgar hands him the Martin Luther King file, and he says, we have these audio tapes of Martin Luther King, and he's having an affair with one of his staffers and all this stuff. And Lyndon Johnson's response to him is, at least in the movie, is if we start going after every minister who's chased after a little bit of tail on the side, we wouldn't have anybody to listen to in church anymore. And there's some of that happening within the far left progressive machine that is out there. They can try to tell us that it's not, but it's there. And I've seen it in New Mexico. I've seen it in other places where people that are accused of something are often forgiven because they fit their mold. And there was a time and you're in my Democratic Party back in the day, because we grew up in the Clinton era, and that scared the living daylights out of us that type of a scandal would ever hit any one of us.
Sisto, Al Franken, like one of the funniest guys, Stuart Smalley himself, who is good enough, bad enough, and dang it, people like him. This guy had to resign his Senate seat because there's a picture of him with a armed service woman on a helicopter just this far away, right? Inappropriate, but that's it. Like that, he resigned over that picture because the Democrats lost their effing mind over his quote unquote antics. And then then they get so consumed by listen, the Trump stuff. We were upset. Everyone's upset. Like his audio tapes on that TV show with Billy Bush, where he got busted talking about his improprieties and grabbing women. I mean, every Democrat stood up on a podium, the moral clarity of our country. And all of a sudden, these Democrats in the Senate, right? They don't give a shit about integrity. They don't give a shit about morality. They care about power. Graham Planter is one vote that gets them to a majority. That's what they care about.
Before we get to that, it's just the Democrats. Let's talk about our friends on the other side of the aisle.
Because I got to hold them accountable.
Yeah, I think there was a guy who was going to be Attorney General that my ex MTG was pretty upset about that. That guy was going to be elevated to Attorney General. I think he had to resign. I think in this case and in this situation, it's a huge problem, and if we're not recognizing that, then the DSAs need to take a long step back, and the organizations that have been putting money into helping find these candidates, they need to be questioned for malpractice, because not doing a proper vetting process of these guys is just plain laziness, and we're starting to see that with the extreme side of the aisle, because it's easy to run against Trump or run against the extremes of either side. It's a heck of a lot harder to find that messaging that's really going to resonate with people and inspire them. I've said it on this show, and I'll say it again. Talked to so many of my friends who are in the Democratic Party or lean left, and they're tired of voting against someone. They want to vote for someone. And the only way that we're going to get there, Eddie, is by, moving to the middle. So how do we get them to the middle? We've got to take this idea of semi-open primaries, and we have to actually and close primaries and just create what they have in California, which is a jungle primary across the entire country. Because when voters from both sides of the aisle get to go in and choose the top two and let them duke it out at the end, I guarantee you we're going to start seeing an ideology shift that speaks to everyone and not just to the bases of both sides.
Yep. And who opposes jungle primaries the most?
That would be Democrats most of the time.
The party, right? The party systems.
Yeah.
Or the advocacy groups that fund the party systems, right?
Yeah.
The C4 tables. Those of you that don't know, the C4 tables are the political action committee tables that they gather around the state. They gather around each party, Republican, Democrat. And these are these special interest groups, right, that give to the party. They hate jungle primaries. Why? Because their special interest priorities are not front and center and used as the sounding alarm to run a candidate to win for an election.
Yeah.
Those C4s now become muted because it is now the populace as a whole electing the most common sense. And I absolutely agree with you, Sisto. I would love to see more jungle primaries, if at least for the very fact that it gives all of us a chance to elevate our discourse, elevate our dialogue for the most common sense and rational individuals to talk about the priorities of that state or area and the good common sense solutions. So I'm right there with you, sir.
Yeah, I think, looking at our home state of New Mexico and how a semi-open primary operated here in New Mexico, it proved to me, and we were talking about the extremes in that 30% and that 20% of the Republicans and Democrats. So in that 30%, 98% considered themselves to be progressive. 1% were moderate, and 1% was conservative.
Say that again. Are you serious?
Yeah.
Of the 30% of Democrats
that voted in New Mexico.
How many?
98% would be considered progressive.
98%.
1% was independent, and the other one, and that's just the Democrats. I'm not talking about the independents. Okay.
I know.
And so then on the conservative side, on the Republican side, 96% of them consider themselves to be conservative.
Okay.
4% or 2% consider themselves to be moderate. And it's like 2.5. And then it's like 1% considers themselves to be liberal, a liberal Republican. Now, let's talk about the independents. The independents, 40% consider themselves to be progressive. 20% consider themselves to be moderate. And the balance consider themselves to be conservative.
40%. Interesting.
And so the part that we have to start looking at is and that's not just by mistake. I think the independents in New Mexico, we've seen a rise of them and we're seeing a rise of them across the country of people registering as independent, and that's because people. It's not that they don't agree with the ideology of some of the candidates. They don't like the parties. They don't like how the party machines operate. And both parties need to take a step back, look at themselves, and determine how they're going to shape themselves moving forward. Because eventually what's going to happen is we're going to move to a jungle primary. And when a jungle primary happens in a presidential race, everybody's going to really flip out when that happens. Because you and I, Eddie, we don't get that cool party in July at some nice stadium in the country and get 4 days of hanging out with our friends.
Yeah.
So, with that being said, Eddie, we're at the end of our show. It's our favorite time of the evening.
It's time for our favorite segment. Tell me something spicy, something prickly, and something quickly.
Eddie, what do you got for me? What you got that's prickly, something quickly, something spicy? What do you got?
All right, Sisto. Well, my spicy take of this week, that Cactus Crossfire, Secretary of State Marco Rubio was in front of Congress this week. And Secretary of State Marco Rubio had this aura about him. I don't want to say arrogance, because I don't think he was arrogant, but he certainly acted like, y'all are a bunch of crazy fools, and I'm here to try to set the record straight. And boy, did he behave that way. You had congresswomen storming out on him because they didn't like their answers. You had a congresswoman who's just criticizing him over his shoes. It was bizarre. And he's like, you're talking about shoes? I'm at a circus, Congresswoman? And these Democrats, their messaging couldn't have been worse. There's so many things they could have talked about. I love Ted Lieu from California, but Congressman Lieu focused his entire message on President Trump's sleep schedule. That's it. That's all he focused on. I mean, how forgetful are we as Democrats to forget that our president that we nominated in 2000 and had for 4 years was one of the most considered old and perhaps, cognitively impaired presidents in our modern history. And then for us to just quickly aim those guns on Trump, which that might be the case, and I'm not disputing it, but boy, did Marco Rubio smash that back in Congressman Liu's face. So my spicy take is Rubio is setting himself up to be the Republican nominee for the presidential election of this country. And you know what? Unless the Democrats can find their way away from these extremes and come to the middle with a Shapiro or Bashar or someone of that ilk, I think Rubio might be the next president of the United States of America. That's my prediction here on June 4th, 2026. My producers, you better pin that, because if he becomes president, I want this on loop on every social media site. So that's my spicy take. Prickly. All right, so I'm gonna get a little prickly with you here. I watch what's happening in the Middle East. Everyone is affected by oil prices, gas prices. It's affecting everyone's pocketbook. The economy is struggling because we are at war. We are at war with Iran. We are at war in protecting our sovereignty and our way of life here in the West. And meanwhile, the U.S. has issued a common sense ceasefire. Israel, Lebanon, Kuwait, the U.S., a couple of other, I think UAE, Arab countries have all agreed to this ceasefire and begged Iran, Hezbollah, and Hamas to follow, and probably the Houthis in Yemen, to follow this ceasefire. Guess what? Just hours ago, June 4th, 2026, they rejected it. Mm-hmm. Hezbollah said, absolutely not. We will not negotiate or cooperate with Western ideas, right? They were very aggressive. And this is the same thing as Hamas. They continue to create terrorism in the Midwest or Middle East. They continue to throw bombs to Kuwait and UAE. This group of individuals, they threw bombs in Lebanon and Turkey. And yet here we are in this country where we see candidates taking money from the American Priorities Pact, which is run by Hussein Marouk, the guy that is funding and bankrolling Hezbollah and Hamas. And guess what, Sisto? Again, this is not a conspiracy theory show, but it is out there. Washington Post, MSN News, Hussein Marouk, he owns Dollar Rent-A-Car. So I want everyone to think about that. Here we are in this country funding, candidates through a PAC that is supporting folks against our interests in the Middle East who owns Dollar Rent-A-Car. And these people are getting elected like Dr. Adam Hawaii. So that is my prickly take. I think we need to do something about this American Priorities PAC. We need to look into that because there's something very shady going on there. Finally, my quickly take, other than the fact that I love Sisto's hat bands that match his t-shirt. What a style. Let's give it up to my good friend Sisto. More importantly, Elon Musk. Now, a lot of criticism on Elon Musk, but the Neuralink technology that is coming out from his company that he is building, he is expecting by 2008, that's 2 years from now, Sisto, that we will have the opportunity to upload to our brains expert knowledge on how to create muscle memory, knowledge, act, insert. I mean, this is the Matrix in real life, Sisto. This is incredible. Now, I don't know how much of that is BS, but I was thinking about this. If I had someone's brain uploaded to mine, I'd want Bear Grylls. I'd want the survivalist knowledge of how to take a tree and make food and water and fire and survive. That would be mine. So, Sisto, before you go spicy prickly quickly, who would you want uploaded to your brain and why?
I don't want anybody in my head. I don't want anybody in my head. I want to just, I don't want anybody in my head. I have enough stuff going on in there on my own that I'm working out with. So, it's a crowded room already, Eddie. So I'm just going to stay away from it. Okay.
All right, brother. Tell me what's your,
my prickly takes, my takes this week are all going to kind of tie in with each other. My prickly take are parties. They love to talk about expanding the tent, but for some reason, external groups to both ends are clamping down on the parties and saying, we're going to say who gets in line and who gets at the door. And they shouldn't be. And if parties continue to do this, if parties continue to put, and parties and party officials and party leaders continue to put their thumbs on the scale, don't be surprised when people start to walk away. And this is just a simple warning. It was something that happened in New Mexico. We had candidates and elected officials who are putting their thumbs on the scale. It's got to stop, and it's not gonna help the cause any further. Spicy take. Greg Hull in New Mexico proved that you can be a conservative without cosplaying as a talk show host. And that's what voters are going to start looking for moving forward. They don't want Maury. They don't want Geraldo. They don't want Sally Jesse. They just want somebody that's going to make things better for the state of New Mexico. And I think Greg Holt proved that in his primary. My quickly take, people that feel politically homeless, they're not lost, okay? They're searching. They're searching for leaders who show up for them. Not just for the base, but for everyone who feels overlooked when parties pull to the far edges of both sides. The middle isn't shrinking, it's waiting. And waiting for grounded, authentic leadership that prioritizes bridges over trenches. That's asking for belonging over theatrics. Balance doesn't have to compromise hope or progress. Coalition building isn't about just winning elections. It's about listening to people that aren't seen and lean in, folks, because passion sparks change, but maturity sustains it. And the future of our state demands both. So that's my quickly take for this show. And
you are spitting some wisdom right there. Well,
I
love it.
That was a long sit at the computer today thinking that out, because I want people to understand that, it takes more than just being a soundbite to lead. And I want people to be more thoughtful than being thoughtless. And I want them to come around to that. And any of those who know me, they know that my favorite thing is that in my own personal life, I try to be more thoughtful than thoughtless. And that's something that we should I think that everybody can take into their hearts and moving forward. So, Eddie, with that,
great stuff. We
had a great show. I want to thank Gabe, our producer, Mandy, our producer, and everybody here at the Cactus Crossfire team. Remember, to everybody on the show, Go to cactuscrossfire.com, sign up for our website, hit like, hit subscribe.
Hit those likes, subscribe.
And
folks,
let us know what you think.
Yes.
We're not made of glass. We love it when you guys engage. So thanks everybody for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.
Peace.
The sun is high, the air is dry, voices clash under the sky, dusty roads and loud